Hey guys, welcome back to Flatpak Effects, the place where I teach you how to create better and more engaging videos using video effects. Now, I apologize for the long delay in uploading videos recently. As most of you know, I've been working on my Motion Effects Pro course. Now, if you like these sort of tutorials and you want to understand more on how to create better and more engaging videos using video effects, then check out my Motion Effects Pro course in the link in the description below. And it's packed with After Effects, visual effects tutorials, as well as breakdowns, how to make video effects. It's everything you need to know for creating video effects in one complete course. So let's jump straight into After Effects and get started. Ideally for this, you want to have a pack of playing cards. As I didn't have a pack, I just used an old hard drive here, and I basically just put these tracking markers on the back because that'll really help us inside of After Effects to track this surface. So with my clip, I'm just going to right click, create a new comp from selection. Now the first part of this is we want to track that surface. So what I'm going to do is come up to track in Mocha and then open up Mocha here. Next, what I'm going to do is just create a spline over the top which runs along that edge. So this is the part that we want to try and remove here. I'm going to select all those, sharpen up those edges. I'm also going to make sure perspective is on and start tracking. Now, all of those tracking points that we have on there are really going to help Mocha in tracking that surface. So if your track is slipping around a lot, then most likely it's because you haven't got a clean surface that Mocha can use. Now I'm going to show you if your track starts slipping, I'm going to show you how to fix that up, and we can tidy all of that up once this is finished. Okay, I'm going to come back to the start here and just track backwards, just to track the first little part. Now I can see the track is slipping, and that's perfectly okay. We're going to fix all of that up. It's just about getting it as close as we can to start with. Okay, now that's done, I can see that the track has slipped a bit going through. So now I just need to go through and tidy up any of these edges that don't quite sit correctly. So I'm just going through. This is the great thing about Mocha. You can just go through and you don't have to do every single keyframe. You can just do every so often, just tidy up that mask and it'll automatically fill in those gaps for you. But you can see Mocha's done a really good job. Now I know a lot of you don't like Mocha, and that's perfectly fine, but it is a far superior tracker when it comes to doing complex tracks like this. So I'm just going through, just double checking that track. It all looks pretty good. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. We're just trying to get it close enough. Okay, so just save that. Come up here, save my project, and close that once we've got all that. Now we need to come down to the matte settings up here, and we want to create a mask. So these are the masks inside of After Effects because we want to cut this out. So what we're going to do is we're going to select visible layers and obviously make sure that that one is selected. That's the layer we tracked, and just simply create the mask. So straight away we've got already a cutout done. So it's ready to go. What I'm going to do is select that layer. I'm going to duplicate it. And with that top layer, what we want to do now is we need to create a 3D camera to track to that surface. Now, if I just threw a 3D camera tracker over the top, After Effects is just going to spasm. It's going to think that all of this background stuff that we can't see, but it can, is really going to confuse it. So what we need to do is take that. I'm going to right click, come down to pre-compose, move all of the attributes into that new window, so we just end up with a blank frame like this. So now what I want to do with that layer is we need to track it. So I'm going to come up to animation and track camera. That's going to start the 3D camera tracker. Okay, so that's completely done now. It's tracked that, and I can see, you should get something that looks exactly like this. I can see all those little tracking markers. I'm just going to select a part here on the middle, right click, and I want to create a solid and camera. The solid is currently tracked to that layer, but it's not the right dimensions. We need to just readjust this. So all I do is I'm just going to simply drag this down and move these dimensions down. Now I can rotate this around. It's perfectly fine because it's tracked to that layer. It won't affect it too much. I'm just going to drag this up here and then just reposition it. So I'm just trying to basically fill over the top of that layer. Anywhere where it's not quite, I'm just going to drag this out, trying to get it as close as I can to fill that layer. So something like that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to take that layer because we want to add stuff into that, and I'm just going to also pre-compose this layer as well. And I want to leave all of the attributes of that layer, so we just end up with a blank template here. Now this is not the right dimensions, and that's okay because we're going to fix that up later. We just need it to sit over the top at the moment. So with that layer now complete, I'm just going to rename this to my holder, so just so I can keep track of everything. So with that layer that we just used to track that camera, we can just simply delete that because we don't need that anymore. We've got the layers that we need up here already. So what I want to do with my original cards layer here now, which is that layer that we first duplicated that we haven't touched yet, I'm going to come down to the mask and I'm going to subtract that mask. Then I want to drag this holder so it sits in behind that. So we end up with a nice clean frame underneath. One thing I've done here is I like to add a stroke that goes around the outside. So I'm going to duplicate that top layer. So we've got a duplicate there. And I'm going to come up to effect, down to generate, and I want to add the stroke effect. Just apply this to all masks and I can drag this up, and that's going to create that little white box that goes around the outside. Now I'm also going to set this to be on transparent, and that will become evident later. I'm also going to drag up the brush hardness here. And now I want to start working on my holder layer. So I'm just going to double click and open this up. So we've got a blank layer here. And what I've supplied for you is I've supplied this image of this card, which you can just drag straight on top. Now you can also scale this up here, and I'm also going to drag out the aspect here so that it fills that layer. Because when I go back to my original layer, the aspect is going to be inside of that comp. If I don't do this, you can see it's all squished, and that's perfectly fine. You could come back here and fix that aspect afterwards. So if you didn't want that layer to be all squished, you could do it either way, and that's perfectly fine. For me, I'm just going to drag this up here and pull it out like this so I know, so it's looking the way that I want it to. Now, in my example, what I did was I removed the white part of this image. So I came up to Effect, down to King, and I came down to the Extract tool, and I simply just took out the white part here. And what I did here is I just deleted that background. So we're working with a white card here. Then what I also did was come up to Effect, down to Generate, and I added a fill. Now here I can just change this to be white. I can also turn off this background just so we can see what we're doing. And the other thing I did was I came up here and I made sure that the fill was set to none, and I just drew a stroke that went around the outside of that layer, just so it sits evenly around the outside of that shape there, or the outside of the playing card. Now when I come back to that layer, you can see we have that. If I turn off this background, you can see we have that layer all nicely tracked in there. So what we can do with this layer, because we have one holder, we can now keep duplicating that holder to create different effects. So what I did was I took that layer and I just duplicated it in my composition. So I've got two layers that are essentially the same. At the moment, these both link to the same composition, and I need them to be in their own composition. So I'm going to come up here and duplicate this comp, which is this composition holder here. I'm going to duplicate this 3 times. I'm just going to rename this one, just so I can keep track of the different layers here, just to make it easy. So we've got 3 different layers here, and I'm going to duplicate 3 times down here. Now I need to link to these layers. So with that holder 2, because that still links to holder 1, I'm going to grab my second holder, and with that layer selected, I'm also holding Alt or Option on my keyboard. I'm going to drag that over the top. and release. And once I open that up, you can see we're now in holder 2. So I'm going to do that once more with this one on holder 3. And again, we've got that composition linking to those 3 different compositions. Now at the moment, I'm just going to focus on my first holder here, which I'm going to drag to the top. So this is going to be the one that's on top. I'm just going to open this up. And for this one, I'm going to delete the border. I don't want the border on this one. I'm also going to come up here to my pen tool, and with that layer selected, I'm going to draw a mask that runs around the ace of spades here. So I don't want any of that other stuff around, I just want this part. The other thing I'm going to do is also draw another mask which goes around this inside part. So I'm just trying to mask out this little part in the middle. And what I'm going to do is come down to the mask settings, and I want to subtract that. So now with that layer, I'm going to duplicate that layer. So I've got one that sits on top. I'm just going to turn off this bottom one. And down under the masks, what I want to do is just delete that mask. And I want to set this to be add. So I'm just basically isolating on my top layer that little middle circle that we're going to animate. And I'm going to turn on that bottom layer again, so we've got the ace back. And then I'm going to come over to my effects controls for that bottom layer with the fill settings. And I can just come in here and just change the color to be whatever I like. So I'm just going to go with this sort of color here. And if I come back to my composition, you can see that we've got that layer now isolated, and it all looks really good. The next part is I want to create that 3D illusion of the layers sitting on top of each other. So I'm going to turn on that next layer and open that second composition. And for this one, I just want to delete the card. So we've just got a holder that sits underneath. And what I'm going to do here is at about the 3-second mark, I'm going to come down to the transform settings, and under position, I'm just going to create a position keyframe and then create another position keyframe here. And I'm going to drag down on that Z axis. So what it's doing is it's animating that Z space now. Now that's a bit too far, so I'm just going to drag this up slightly and just keep testing. So already you can see we're getting that 3D illusion, maybe a little bit less to something like that. Now what I can do is take that layer and just duplicate it, because we just want to keep that exact same holder. So we just want the outline, and I'm going to hit U to bring up those keyframes. And for this one, I'm going to drag this one even further down. So we end up with something like that. Then I can turn on my third holder, which is that background layer, which is my third holder here. And I'm going to also do the same thing again. So I'm going to hit P to bring up the position properties. I'm going to create a keyframe there and then drag this one right down. So I've got that 3D illusion now. So they're animating out from a stationary position, they're animating backwards, all in one smooth movement. So that's looking really good there. Now I want to work on my background. So I'm just going to bring this one up here. And what I'm going to do is take that card layer and hit T on the keyboard. And I want to just drag the opacity right down to maybe around 40 or 50%, somewhere around there. That's going to create that illusion like it's sinking into the background. So something that looks like this. Next, I want to animate that little circle. So as it spins, it's animating those layers apart. So what I can do is come back to that first layer up here, my top holder. My playhead is lined up at the start of those transitions. I'm going to double click that. Then I want to come in here on my top layer, which is that little circle, and I need to move the anchor point. So I'm going to hit Y on the keyboard to bring up the pan behind tool and just reposition this. I can select that layer, hit R on the keyboard, create a rotation keyframe, go across about a second, drag this up to around 2. So it animates something like that. I'm also going to give this a bit of motion blur. I can make these easy ease as well, just to help soften out that entire animation. And now you can see as that rotates, it's unwinding those layers. So it looks like it's animating those layers all out together, which is a really cool effect. Now I can also select those keyframes, right click and make them all easy ease. Another cool little thing you can do here is also take these and off-center them. So my background's going out first and then these layers are following out. So it sort of staggers that delay of that effect. So it can look pretty cool like that. Now, once I get to about 8 seconds here, I then want to start fading off these layers and fading on my background. So I'm going to leave my top layer. I want to select these 2 middle layers, which are those, basically those lines that run around the outside. I'm just going to hit T on the keyboard, create a opacity keyframe, and then fade those layers off. The other thing we also need to do, keep in mind that we haven't got a layer that sits behind this. So I'm going to come back up here, and this layer can be whatever you like. It's the layer that you're going to transition into. So for me, I'm just going to drag this video clip straight underneath. And I'm also just going to right click and create a black solid here. So I'm just going to create a solid, make sure this is set to black and hit OK. Drag that down on top of my rocks layer. And I'm also going to hit T to make an opacity keyframe for that layer, and then fade that off as well. So it's fading off that entire background to reveal that layer underneath. One other thing we didn't do in our original comp is I come back up to that holder on this layer, which is that background, and I want to create a background for this layer too. So for this one in particular, what I did was just created a dark blue sort of layer here that sat behind. Now when I come back to that, you can see we've got that layer sitting behind, so something like this. And what I'm also going to do about here, I'm going to start fading off that top layer. So I'm going to come up here, hit T on the keyboard to bring up the opacity, create an opacity keyframe here and fade off that top layer too. So we're starting to fade off those layers basically one at a time. And the other thing I want to do is I'm going to use one of the built-in effects inside of After Effects or presets to basically dissolve that background layer off. So where this background layer is, we want to get rid of that. I'm going to come up to my effects and presets. If yours aren't there, come up to Window and make sure Effects and Presets is selected. And I'm just going to select the block digital here and drag this straight on top. And I want to reverse these layers here. So I want it to basically fade off instead of fading on. So something like this. And the last part of this, I want the camera to zoom through that opening now into my background. So what I can do is right click, create a new null object. I now need to parent all of these layers except for that background layer onto that null. Then I'm going to hit S to create a scale keyframe just as this starts animating off this background, and then start scaling the camera to move through this opening. So the camera is going to essentially fly through that opening like this. And for the background, what I also did was I needed to match that bit of camera movement as well. So what I did was I took that background layer and I also created a scale keyframe by itself, and I just wanted a little bit of movement on this one. So as the camera flies through, it's essentially also zooming through as well. Now just to hide this little bit here, what I can also do is come up to Effect, down to Stylize and add the motion tile, and then just mirror the edges and give it a bit of height, and that's just going to hide that little edge there. And one last thing I can do is also add motion blur for pretty much all of those layers. So that's just going to add a bit of that camera blur as the camera flies through. And you can also soften out this movement by adding an easy ease onto this and this background one as well. And that's just going to help smooth out that entire animation just to make it look a lot smoother. So that's pretty much the effect completely done. The one last little thing that I've picked up here at the start is the hand comes into shot, or my hand here. What I can do is take that top layer, just duplicate it, drag that all the way to the top, and I'm just going to remove all the masks on that layer. Then what I can do is just create a really rough mask that sits over the top. So I can feather that over and then create a mask path and just animate this entire mask. So I'm just going through and adding a rough mask which sits over the top. Maybe back off that feather a little bit there. And then for the end, I'm just going to drag that in because we don't need that anymore. We're just trying to match the edge of that mask. Now you could go through and actually track this mask in, but I'm just trying to create something that's just rough here, that's just doing the job. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's just to hide that edge of that mask. And when I play through, we have the finished effect. So that's how you create this basic effect. I recommend taking this effect, working inside of those holders and really animating the different parts of the card or adding different layers over the top to get some interesting effects. If you like this video, you can give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down. You can also check out a playlist of videos very similar to this here on the side of screen. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.